Welcome, conversing listeners. What is the credibility of the faith in a time like this? The Rethinking Church Initiative is launching a new podcast called Credible Witness.
I'm Nikki Toyamasito, and this is Credible Witness, a collection of stories and wisdom from faithful people wrestling with and bearing witness to the credibility of Christian life today. Each episode is an invitation to listen generously and courageously to one person, navigating social tension and moral complexity, negotiating doubts, struggles, and fears, overcoming obstacles and pursuing justice, and living out the convictions of their faith. And every voice reminds us that the church is called to be a credible witness to Christ, a living reality of hope, justice, truth, and love.
It's a beautifully rendered collection of stories that reward a courageous and generous listening. So please check out our show notes for links to the Credible Witness podcast feed, as well as crediblewitness.us. I'm hoping that you'll subscribe today, and I believe you'll be deeply encouraged by the series of episodes to come. Thank you for listening courageously with me, and may God bless this new effort.
Conversing is produced and distributed in partnership with Comment Magazine and Fuller Seminary. I'm Mark Labberton. Welcome to Conversing. Today on Conversing, we have the opportunity to welcome two guests. I'll introduce them in just a moment. We all know that the world has been taken by surprise and a bit disoriented by the events of the United States extracting the president of Venezuela to New York City. This has led to all kinds of national and international discussions, great anxiety and anger on many parts, celebration on other parts, both in the United States and in Venezuela. Today, we have the opportunity of having two voices from Latin America. Each has been a theological leader and professor. Both have studied and worked at the Biblical Seminary of Colombia. The first is Dr. Elizabeth Sendek. Elizabeth was the president of Biblical Seminary in Colombia in Medellin until 2021, having served there in a variety of capacities for over 28 years. She's been a friend and a mentor to me in so many different ways. I'm extremely grateful for her ongoing work and the role that she plays on the boards of MESA Global and also Resource Leadership International. Our second guest is Julio Isaza. He too is Colombian and has been educated there. He's a pastor in the Covenant Church of Colombia, has a master's degree that he earned in the United States. He also holds a master's degree in conflict and peace studies from the University of Medellin and is currently pursuing a PhD in theology and peace at the Oxford Center for Mission Studies in England. His doctoral dissertation title is Cultivating Integral or Biblical Peace in a Context of Socio-Environmental Violence. Elizabeth, Julio, what a gift it is to have you. We're so thankful and eager for your perspective and your wisdom.
Thank you, Mark.
Thank you. Likewise.
You know, we all are aware that we're in a very precarious time in the world on lots of different fronts, and especially internationally right now and in Latin America, there are many, many things that are actually going on, not just what's happening in Venezuela. It's a continent of turbulence, as it has often been and continues to be, and certainly is now with the recent extrication of Venezuela's president and all that the United States is doing in relationship to Venezuela. So it is such a gift to have both of you and to have an opportunity to just hear from people who understand the context deeply, to be able to gain your insight and insight that you may have from other people that you know and things that you've seen and people you've talked to. So thank you again for being a guest today. I wonder if each of you could just start by going back to the day you woke up with the news that Venezuela had been invaded and that the president had been extricated out of Venezuela. Tell us about how you first awoke to the news and what thoughts went through your mind.
I don't normally listen to news very early in the day, but my husband went to pick up the paper, and he came and he said, Maduro was taken out by the U.S., is on his way to New York. So we turned on the news and international channels and we're hearing Colombian news. And it was heartbreaking. Not because I am a follower of Maduro. I have a lot to criticize from Maduro's regime and Chavez's regime previous to that. Well, and those who went beyond them, because it was the horrible corruption in Venezuela that brought about the Chavez to power. But it was heartbreaking for me because it was all about power. And it made me question if power is the ultimate good. They were done. Then questions of morality or theology have no place. We have chosen our idol. That was very sobering and very heartbreaking, really.
So for me, I was with my parents in Colombia, and my dad, especially my dad, he watched news all day. And he is very in favor of the use of power in some ways. And it's very interesting because our history is not very good with that. So when I woke up, Maduro was taken, and he was very happy. And he was very happy. And he spent the whole day watching Colombian news and trying to understand everything. And my dad is 86. So sometimes he doesn't hear very well, and sometimes he takes things out of context. So I had to spend the whole days hearing the news about what's going on. And in some ways, I was taking the same thing that Elizabeth said. Could have been a different way of doing this. Could have been a way without using violence. Could have been a way of having a conversations and doing different things. And then I called my friend. I have a good Venezuela friends who live in the city of Medellin, and I start asking questions. And she shared with me that some of her family was killed in Caracas, because you see in the news about Maduro taken, but you don't see the consequences of what happened. And she said that one of the bombs got in her neighborhood, in her family's neighborhood, and because the houses are not very strong, the windows exploded, and some people got killed because of that, and one was her family. So she was sharing that with me. So for me, it was a shock too. I know something was going to happen, but I was not expecting that to happen so quickly. And also, I'm against the use of violence. So for me, it was hard. And listening to the news was also harder because what you listened to it was more, in some ways, approving the use of violence. And so for me, that's hard. Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Julio, say a bit more about how it is that your own sense about violence developed as a person. What experiences did you have that caused you to be given over to an understandable position as an anti-violence person?
I grew up in the area of Colombia where, when growing up, was I call the paradise. I grew up in a farm with my parents, with river, creeks, and everything was fine until I was about 6-7 years old, when the guerrilla group came to our house for the first time in Colombia, and then we have conversation with them. And after that, the military came, and things were very bad because the military people were accusing my parents to support the guerrilla group. Then because of that, we had to leave our farm. and moved to the town. And the town was worse because the government of Colombia used some group. Now I know what groups were to clean the town. They call limpieza social, where they use some kind of government groups to trying to get rid of the bad people in the town.
And the bad people at that moment that you're referring to are defined by what?
People who
opposition to the guerrillas?
Not so much opposition to the guerrillas. Were more like people who were involved in drug or people who were.
I see.
Yeah, people who the government
Petty crime.
Yeah, some kind of But the guerrillas at that time, they were in the countryside. They began to start to the town, going into the town, and that's when the paramilitary group began to come to the town at the end of the 80s. The paramilitary came, and that was very bad because they used violence against farmers, against people who they were supporting the guerrillas. And that was very, very bad. That was very bad. And so when I became a follower of Christ, in some ways, I decided myself that violence was not the way. And because I've seen so much violence, I'm writing a book right now about my history. And one of the things that I find out is that when I was a child, our teachers asked us to draw stuff. And I would draw two kind of things. One was our farm, river, creeks. And the other one was helicopters and militaries killing each other, hitting each other. Now I remember that was the kind of thing that I draw. But I decided that when I began to study the Jesus life, the gospel especially, I saw that Jesus' way is not a violent way. Violence was used against him, but I decided that violence is not the way, and that's part of my life now. And even in my house, my dad think a different way. My dad is more like against guerrilla, against left wing. He's very strong against that. My mom is very different. My mom is more pacifist in everything. And I have sometimes conversation with my dad about forgiveness and everything, but it's still something hard. Yeah, but this is my context. I grew up in and it's still the area where I grew up is still violence, be part of the city. I'm working with a peace group, a youth group who is doing peace building in the area. I'm writing my thesis right now about peace based in my area.
Yes.
Yeah.
Wow. Let's broaden that a bit. When you have been both hearing and observing what you have about what's going on in Venezuela, and you think of the church in Venezuela and the variety of ways that Christian people in particular have responded to these events in the last week and more, what would you just give us a landscape? Just describe what you're hearing from Christian people in Venezuela about how they're responding to this. I'm sure there's no standard response, but what are you hearing?
Well, what I can say is that people are very cautious.
Yes.
So I contacted friends, people I've known in Venezuela, to ask them if they would be willing, a couple of people, to participate in the podcast. And they said, one of them, was beautiful. It took him 2 days. He's a pastor. He heads a parachurch ministry. And then he responded, Elizabeth, I would love to, but for the sake of my congregation and the organization I serve, I cannot voice any opinion because the situation is so fluid, volatile, so uncertain.
Yes.
I talked to another friend who is a pastor. He's Venezuelan. He lives in Colombia and keeps in touch with pastors in Venezuela. He visits them once or twice a year. And he has been in touch with them, but he was not free to share what they tell him. In fact, they have to be very cautious about what they tell him in social networks. So it is hard. There is fear. That is for certain.
Right.
The only one thing he mentioned is that all of his pastor friends agreed that this time is an opportunity to share the gospel of hope and to point to Christ as our source of strength and stability in such volatile and hopeless times. And that was so beautiful to hear, because then you realize the Spirit of God is moving.
Right, right.
And leading pastors to focus on something they can do to contribute, not only to keep the church safe, but to contribute to the healing of their country. That was amazing.
Right. Does that reflect what you're hearing too, Julio?
Yeah, this is I have conversation with Rosa. Rosa is from Venezuela. Her family immigrated to Colombia, I think about probably 8 years ago, desperate because of the situation. And she has been one of my students for about 4 years. We studied theology with me during pandemic. And then she has very strong roots in the church in Venezuela. And we have good conversation. And so I asked her about the church in Venezuela. And she said the same that Elizabeth said. They are very cautious because they don't know what to do with the regime. They are not sure who is in control. Mm-hmm. They are afraid to say something because, they say, we are not sure who is in control. And we have hope that things are going to change. But we are very cautious. The Venezuela government, they have a decree they call conmoción externa or something like that, which is a decree.
Internal.
Yeah. So they are not sure. Yeah. They just continue sharing the gospel, but they are not saying anything against or in favor of what's happened. They're trying to be very cautious. Mainly, they are happy. My friend said they're happy because of a bigger change is coming. But they are very cautious because they are afraid. Uh-huh.
Right. Mm-hmm. Well, I do think that the average person in any circumstances where power, as you said beautifully, Elizabeth, where power is the primary factor and you feel fundamentally powerless to do anything about the macro circumstances. Mm-hmm. I mean, the average citizen in Venezuela is no more capable of doing something to change what's going on or even affect what's going on as the average citizen in any country. But it does strike me that often in times like this, there are certain Christian voices that can sometimes find a way of being a public voice for what may be a strategy or a position that has a willingness to step out for different reasons of their own circumstances. They might be able to do this. I mean, to speak specifically about somebody who's not Venezuelan and who has certainly spoken out and certainly has a very, in one sense, a safe position from which to speak out, has been the Pope. Pope Leo has been very direct and clear about his opposition to violence and his tremendous concern about this particular moment, both in terms of United States action as well as in terms of what's happening on the ground in Venezuela. Yeah. But are you hearing of any emerging Christian voices that might somehow have a broader reach in this moment? Or is it just too early for such a thing to have happened?
I really have a great appreciation for Dr. Darío López in Peru. Darío serves in a marginal neighborhood in Lima, where he started his pastoral ministry. And even though he has become a very well-known voice in Latin America and beyond, and has all the degrees and he's published books, he still maintains his primary focus on serving his community. And I think it's La Maria, the neighborhood. So he is a pastor of that community, not only his church. And it's funny, he says that even robbers protect him in his community because he's the pastor. Darío has expressed very thoughtful, well-articulated opinions about what is going on. And one of the things that I do appreciate a lot is that his first post after what happened was on prayer. On praying for Venezuela and for those who had suffered through the years of Maduro, but who continued to suffer through what was happening with the U.S. incursion. Of prayer for the U.S. as a country that also experiences this idea of ruthless power in many dimensions. And that was beautiful to hear from a Latin American who, during his years as a university student, lived the terror of Sendero Luminoso and the counterinsurgents from the military and then the Fujimori dictatorship.
Yes, yes.
And who opted to continue, like many others in the country. And then in a subsequent post, he says, prayer is a spiritual resource, valuable, needed, urgent, every day. One prays in times of peace and in times of crisis. But prayer must also go alongside personal and collective actions in defense of life, justice, freedom, reconciliation, and peace.
Yes.
I learned that during the violent days of subversion and government counteraction in the years of dictatorship that brought death to my country.
Yes, yes.
What
a beautiful expression.
It is beautiful. On his post, he analyzes a lot of the geopolitical aspects and everything. But to me, this is very relevant because as people who have gone through dictatorships, and we know a lot of that in Latin America.
Yes.
To the point that there is a whole genre of literature that's called the novel of the dictator.
Uh-huh.
And many of those dictators also were supported by foreign governments.
Right, right.
So it's not that they were all homegrown and home supported.
Yes, yes.
But I think there is a sensitivity when you see power being abused, like all your alarm lights go on.
Mm-hmm.
Because we have this common history of violence and domination and of learning to survive and of seeing rays of hope. And that has nurtured the prayers and the thoughts of how people approach those who are doing more analysis from a Christian perspective, how we are approaching this.
Yes, yes. You know, following the divisions that exist in the American church right now, you find that there are people who are absolutely endorsing everything that the U.S. government has done and celebrating it. And then you have plenty of Christian people who are very dramatically and specifically and personally critiquing it. Now, the interesting thing is that a general comment about this period in the U.S. has been that there are more people frozen in their speech than is typically the case because of power. And so what's very humbling to me is that some who would wish for the U.S. government to be held accountable for what it's done and not making a comment about Maduro, but about the legitimacy or illegitimacy of the U.S. government's action. It's been very interesting to me to realize that we still have this belief that we should have the freedom to speak boldly and not be tyrannized. Yet we are being tyrannized, and the American public, the Congress itself, is, in my view, tyrannized by forms of power that are causing people not to bear witness in ways that I think their consciences at other times would have spoken differently about than are happening now. I'm saying all this because when I look at the context in Latin America and this repeated and brutalized history of dictatorships, it should be very sobering to us to say, well, oh gosh, the church in Latin America should really be speaking up about this. Well, excuse me, the church in the United States isn't speaking up about it when it's happening on our own doorstep, let alone, dare we say, to a church in a suffering and persecuted context. You should just be bolder. You should be more direct. You should be more aggressive. It's way more complicated than that. And the amount of suffering that's involved in Latin America and in the United States in various ways, but certainly in Latin America and in places around the world because of dictatorships, is so precarious that the ability to speak with freedom and with faith is really a great challenge for their own survival, for their family's survival. And as you've both said, for the congregations that pastors, for example, are serving, that's really very profound. And in a certain way, it's giving, I hope, the U.S. church an opportunity to see a church at the point of critical suffering, facing it in the terms that they have to live it in, as opposed to the terms that we think we are free from, but which history at the moment is suggesting we're not as free as we might have wanted to rhetorically or historically express.
Mark, I would like to share something. A friend of mine, he's a pastor in Chicago and Brownsville Covenant Church. His name is David Swanson. I don't know if you hear about him.
Yes.
He wrote an article in Christian for Social Action, and he wrote the article on January 7th. His dad was in Venezuela for a long time. His dad was a pilot, and David was, when he was a child, who was in Venezuela. So he wrote an article called "Carrying the Flag of Empire: A Christian Response to the U.S. Strike in Venezuela." This is a good article to read. I read it. But I read the article, and it's like my position, but I want to make some comments about the questions about who is talking right now, who is saying something.
Yes, please.
And sometimes it's hard because sometimes we talk when things explode. And sometimes, like when I talked to my friend from Venezuela, she said, why people didn't talk before? Why people didn't talk like in our favor before? Why people didn't just talk but did something? And she said, now people are saying that this is this and this is this. This is a lot of opinion, but we have been suffering for a long time. She said, we were suffering for a long time, and even though I'm a pacifist and I'm against invasion, I tried to hear what she said. She said we didn't want this. We didn't want an invasion. We didn't want to finish in this way, but we have been suffering for a long time. And in some ways, people have now been listening to our suffering. And now some people have their very strong positions against this or against this, but they didn't say anything before. And so that's sometimes it's hard. It's hard. And how do you maintain a balance to say something against, but at the same time to listen to the voices of the people who have been suffering for a long time? And I think the church in Venezuela is trying to be cautious because they are not only afraid to the Venezuelan system right now, but also afraid against the invasion because they don't know what's going to happen. Mm-hmm. So they're afraid in both.
They're caught in two directions.
Yeah. And I remember my friend, she said, we are not expecting things to be solved right now because she said something that sounds like hopeless, but she was right. She said, I think my grandchild are the one who's going to see these things get better.
I see. Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. Because even though she's a woman of faith and she is a woman of prayer and she's always talking about faith, she used to work for the Venezuelan government in the past. Her story is very interesting because her husband left her in Venezuela because he was going to kill himself because he was tired of the situation. He moved to Colombia. And then after a while, she moved to Colombia. And then they have a company in Colombia right now. They're a small company that they're working together as a family, but she still has family in Venezuela. And she said, we are one of the cowards, she said, that we left the country. The people who stay in Venezuela are the ones who are very, she said, brave, but so she's trying to have a balance too, because she said, I don't like violence, but people didn't do anything in our favor before. And now,
yes.
Yeah. So it is hard because I remember because I was her professor teaching about Old Testament theology. And one of the things that I remember that I thought was about when in the book of Isaiah, God used the King Cyrus to free his people. And so I was talking with her about peace and everything. She said, but remember that you told us that God sometimes uses people that we don't think that he's going to use it.
Right.
So it is. She used my own theology to confront me because she said, yeah, it's hard. Yeah. So. Right.
I think that one of the things that we sometimes in all this has been forgotten is the reality of Venezuelans in the diaspora, because they are starting to feel the pressure in communities in Latin America that are saying, so now you can go home.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it is.
Mm-hmm. And I was talking to a friend who lives in Peru, and she was astounded that people in the market and everyone are saying, well, now the Venezuelans can go. We don't want them here. They've never been well received in some places. In others, yes, they have. Mm-hmm.
Well, it's something like 8 million people that have moved from Venezuela just to Colombia.
Yes. It's a fourth of the population of the country.
Yes. Mm-hmm. A fourth, you said?
Yeah. A fourth, according to statistics I heard yesterday. But then you hear of governments that are trying to impose stricter migration laws specifically aimed at Venezuelan migrants in Latin America.
Wow.
So they are also caught in a very difficult situation because now they are being pressured in some cases, go back. And they know they can't go back. In some cases, there is nothing to go back to.
Yeah.
Or they fear that conditions are going to be the same conditions they fled from or worse. And that's another plight. And as Christians, we did, I think the church did a lot, at least in Colombia, in welcoming and serving migrants, even those who were not believers. But there is a call now to care for them while they are in a very different situation.
Lisa,
again.
Yeah, what you said, there was something that I didn't say before, but I remember some people in the neighborhood where my parents live, they were happy. They were Colombian happy. And I heard they say something that for me was, oh no, they said, we are happy because now they can come back to their own countries. Yeah. So in some ways, we have some kind of homophobic, I don't know how do you call it, that, but racist or something? Xenophobic, yeah, that's the word. And I said, wow, because when people ask me about people who moved from Venezuela to Colombia, I said, oh, we were very welcoming, we were very nice with the Venezuelans. But now I realize maybe not so much as we thought we were, because now you hear all these commentaries that, okay, now we are happy because they are coming back to their own countries and stuff. And it's not easy because there are people who they have families in Colombia, they have their business, they are everything. So now they have to leave everything again.
Right. Right. Well, I think I've heard some people begin to try to intimate that it felt initially like maybe it was like the Berlin Wall falling, but this is not like that at all. This is not about a regime change that's coming about in the way that was all part of. Instead, it's really just much more particular. It's Maduro, and then it's systems that are still in place. Now, as according to reports I've read, now to some degree even more brutal in certain expressions of violence toward the population than it was even under Maduro in order to try to get control of the society. And on the other hand, it's filled with so much evidence of people genuinely straining to hold on to hope, believing that this complex, constantly moving jigsaw puzzle could somehow settle into better circumstances for the most ordinary people, not just people that are in particularly privileged roles, but just for the citizenry at large. That's an absolutely right hope to hold and to pray for. And it has to be a long hope. It is not it feels like somehow we can shorten history and bring it now. But, as Jesus says throughout the Gospels, it's always both now and still to come.
Yeah. I found towards the end of last week, I was becoming despondent and very cynical, because you realize that as the world is today, those who hold and grab power are above any constraints. Mm-hmm. International and multilateral organizations are completely useless at this point. There is like this immunity for the horrors you can impose on others around the world.
Yes.
And so I was voicing my complaints to the Lord. And Psalm 73 really hit it for me.
Yes, yes.
Because as I read it, it was like the depiction of the powerful devils. It was like the news of today.
Yes, right. Those opening verses of Psalm 73.
But
right.
then when I tried to understand all this, it troubled me deeply till I enter the sanctuary of God. Then I understood their final destiny.
Yes.
So it seems to me that an eschatological perspective, which is sorely lacking in our church, in most churches in Latin America, is of fundamental importance for a Christian.
Yes.
For the church.
Yes.
In these days that we live, so our hearts can be kept from despondency and cynicism.
Yes, yes.
And nurtured with hope that is certain.
Right. Yeah. Psalm 73 is so remarkable in exactly that way. I mentioned earlier Pope Leo's comments, and I'm curious, knowing that Latin America in general is still predominantly Roman Catholic, and yet the evangelical church is extremely strong throughout Latin America in all kinds of different ways. How are comments by Pope Leo being taken in Latin America? Does it just fall out along the lines of if you're Roman Catholic, you think they're great, and if you're not Roman Catholic, you don't? Or is it, as I am assuming it is, more complicated than that?
I think it's a little complicated because even though people hear those commentaries and they know that it's true, sometimes as evangelicals, people ignore them in some ways. And I want to say that sometimes those commentaries are very good and are powerful, but it doesn't have any meaning if you don't do something tangible. There's a lot of people saying very good commentaries. Like I remember my friend sent me when the UN they have a special meeting, and you hear all the things that the UN was saying is very good. And I said to her, this is good, but they're not doing something practical. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it doesn't have any meaning if you don't do anything. Yeah, so could be very good commentaries, could be very good theology, but if it's not doing anything like with people, so I don't. Yeah, for me, sometimes it's hard because there is a very good theology about something, there is very good articles about something, but people is not doing things with the people, with the Venezuelans, and then so. Yeah, sometimes that's the hardest part for me sometimes. When I teach at the seminary, I ask the students some questions like, okay, this is the incarnation theology. How do you live this daily? How do you live with the people? How do you have another knowledge? How do you live this with people on the ground? And that's always my call to my students. Yeah.
Yes. Mm-hmm. So let's, in that very vein then, let's talk about what you're seeing or not seeing or hearing from liberation theologians in Latin America who have traditionally, of course, made the point that you're making just exactly there, which is that we have to theologize among the people and we have to act among the people in order to be able to give witness to the reality of the character of God and the purposes of God. What are people that are seen as liberation theologians in Venezuela or in Latin America saying about what's happening right now in Venezuela? And even more to your point, Julio, what are they encouraging other people to do or doing themselves?
Do you hear anything, Elizabeth? Because I haven't heard so much about liberation theology now.
Yeah,
So.
the thing is, liberation theology now is of interest in academic circles outside of Latin America. In Latin America, liberation theology is passé.
Yeah.
So,
And what brought it to being passé?
I think
but there were several factors. It is complex, but there were several factors. One of the factors was the fall of the Soviet Union. Because the theoretical construct around which they had built their discourse fell.
Meaning Marxism.
Exactly. So that was part of it.
Yes, right.
Part of it was that you saw some of the communities that were influenced by them, and some of them were flourishing communities, but mostly liberation theologians lived in academic halls in Europe and the US. And they wrote about the poor.
Yes.
And they were the voice of the poor, and they had never lived amongst the poor except for very few of them.
Wow.
Like Boff, like Gustavo Gutierrez himself,
Right.
who even went back
Right.
his last days to Lima to be amongst the poor, and very few others. So they, in that sense, they were not credible.
Yes, right. There's a word.
Because they made a lot of fame and money being the voice of the poor. So liberation theology was influential in Latin America. In some countries, in most countries, they were not.
Yes.
Brazil, Nicaragua, Costa Rica, a bit in Venezuela, a bit in Peru, and probably in Bolivia at some point. I'm not sure really how much. But for example, Colombia, the birthplace of liberation theology, was never really very much influenced by liberation theology, in part because the Catholic Church in Colombia was very conservative and the evangelicals more so.
And also, I would say also that the some use liberation theology for the cause. So you have guerrillas groups who use liberation theology of part of their ideology. So
Yes.
Uh-huh.
I think my impression had been different, so I appreciate your teaching me about this. I am sobered by the kind of indictment that you've just laid out, because it's all of us can be found, as you were hinting, Julio, really at being people who are better able to articulate a theology than to live a theology. And certainly liberation theologians are probably no more or less guilty of that disconnection than anyone else is. But it is interesting to hear what you're describing, and it's very helpful to me to have that perspective. I do think that we're in a period where the questions of how the church takes power and assesses power and considers power and acts is absolutely on the line every single day. And I feel as though a small manuscript that I'm working on right now is an opportunity for me to try to reflect on some of those very issues. But it is extremely difficult to understand it, especially at a time like this where increasingly there are these three great powers, as it were, the United States, China, and not the Soviet Union, but Russia. Those are very looming, ongoing realities that are going to shape power in the 21st century.
I think, Mark, this idea of Christendom is still very, very, we don't talk so much about it, but still this relationship between church and state.
Yes.
This kind of theology is still very strong, even in Latin America. When you study the history of political history in Colombia, in the past, the evangelical church was considered liberal. And we have a big conflict between Catholics and Protestants in the past. But recently, history, the evangelical church is more considered conservative. And now we are on the right wing, even the evangelical church. So we still, I think we still permeate for Western theology very, very strong. And this relationship between church and state is still very strong. And then even if you see now the Colombian candidates to be president. They are now considered themselves Christian. In the past, they didn't believe in God, but now they are Christian. So there is this bit mix. And I think that the church, I just say for what my friend said, is trying to be cautious in this. The church in Venezuela is trying to realize that in the past they were with one political and things didn't work very well. And so they're trying to be cautious to see, okay, we need to be wise what side we take. Not only because of we as a church, but because of country, Venezuela. I think people are trying to be very wise in what to do now.
As we bring this conversation to an end, I just want to call all of us who are thinking about Venezuela to be mindful of the multi-layered complexity of what's going on, that God is not duped by complexity or stopped by complexity, simply responds in the midst of complexity. And so our ongoing prayers and thoughts for people in Venezuela and the Venezuelan diaspora is really, really critical. And also, I think it just exemplifies in one particular stark way in which the United States also needs great prayer, because the church in the U.S. is also so implicated and fraught with its own divisions and hostilities, and the violence against American citizens by the U.S. government was on vivid display, has been on vivid display for many months, but especially the past week or so. And it also causes me to be mindful again of people around the world who are in completely different political circumstances, but for whom this vulnerability before power is their number one tyranny every single day. And
yes,
it's extremely sobering and extremely important to me that the church keep calling itself back to greater clarity about power that really is healthy and good and true and life-giving power, and how we ourselves are meant to offer it in whatever tangible way, going back to your point, Julio, about what are we really actually doing about this, not just making an affirmation that there is such love, but being willing to help embody it ourselves is our vocation. I'm so grateful for both of you and for the insights you've shared with us today, and look forward to continuing to pray and observe what's going on. And
Amen.
We'll certainly uphold you and others that are in our common friendship circle and beyond as this season in Venezuela, Colombia, and throughout Latin America continues. So God bless you, and thank you for being a guest.
Thank you so much, Mark.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you.
Conversing is produced and distributed in partnership with Comment Magazine and Fuller Seminary. Peter Labberton is our engineer and editor. Evan Rosa is our producer. For more information about Comment Magazine, visit comment.org, where you can subscribe, read the current magazine issue, and browse their archive. Fuller Seminary is an evangelical, multi-denominational graduate institution committed to providing indispensable formational education for diverse Christian leaders everywhere. For information, visit fuller.edu. I'm your host, Mark Labberton. Thanks for listening with me.